Hi, my name is Steve Gose, and today we're going to demonstrate repotting orchids and how you can do the same thing with different materials. Now, the first one I want to demonstrate is this little guy here, and this is a Cattleya orchid. This is actually a miniature Cattleya because they can get much larger. This is a type you don't see quite so often, and it's a shame too because they make excellent house plants. These are things that don't mind drying down a little bit between watering, and with reasonable light levels are actually very good bloomers for in the house. With this, I don't know, I think more people should grow them, and there's really not much of a trick to it either. For today, we're going to demonstrate repotting this orchid. And since this is grown up to the edge and is about to jump out over the rim of the pot, and if you look very closely, you can see that it has just begun to produce new roots. You see these little tips protruding where they've emerged from the base of the new growth. That indicates that it's starting into new growth and the roots aren't so large that they're going to be damaged when we yank these out of the pot and clean off the roots. So let's begin. Now this guy, he's got his little name tag there. I'm going to see if this is going to come out on its own. If not, we're going to have to convince it. No, here we go. And out he comes. Then we're going to discard this, and the first thing that you do is to clean the old mix. One of the reasons you have to repot orchids is because the mix that they grow in begins to dry down. And many people ask me, why do you have to grow orchids in silly things? Now this one is growing in bark chips. This orchid, which we're going to demonstrate next, which is a Phalaenopsis, is growing in moss, which is probably the most common way that you see them in this day and age. With the bark chips, this is most like their natural growth out in nature, which is growing up in a tree is what we call an epiphyte. They're not parasitic on plants, but they use them for support to get way up in the canopy so they can get a good supply of light. Remember, these grow in rainforests normally, and there's a lot of competition for light and other resources. So here we go. Now, one of the first things to do is we're going to cut out the dead roots. And this easily accomplished with my buried scissors here. Any roots that are brown or appear empty or thread thin, these are dead roots. Live roots are these ones here. Now we showed the new roots and their green tips beginning to emerge from the new growth, but these other white roots here are still alive. And these, once they enter their next cycle, will start to produce new green tips just like these. And this is what's going to establish this orchid in his new pot. The old stuff though, this we can just trim it away. I'm just using some heavy-duty scissors here. Pruners are just fine to use. Actually, I'm going to use my pruners to divide this. Now, I really have more than I can fit into this pot, which is a good size to put it in. And really, you only need the front few bulbs to make a good division. So here's the lead. This is the active growth, and this is where the new growth is coming out. And it'll make one of these or even more every season. So you're 1, 2, 3, 4. It's actually even a little bit more than you need, but this is a fine division. And what I'm going to do is take my sterilized pruners, and I'm going to cut through the rhizome. The rhizome is the horizontal stem that extends between each new growth and the next. So I think we're going to cut him right here. The old back, this is called back bulbs now. This we'll put off to the side, and this actually is making a new growth. This can be repotted as another division. This will be a few years before it's big enough to flower. This one, in his new pot, should flower in his normal season. And as much as it pains me, I'm going to cut these long roots back just a little bit. Unfortunately, the operation of repotting will basically break off these roots. So we're going to save the trouble and cut it down to here. And this is easily accommodated in the pot. Okay, let's dump out our debris. Now the first step is to put in a nice layer of crockery. Now broken clay pot shards keep the drainage hole from plugging up. Take off my sticker here. And gives a nice airspace. And by the way, the clay pot I'm using to put these in is referred to as an orchid pot. The big difference is that they have additional drainage holes. Remember, these grow up in trees in nature, so they like a lot of air around the roots. That's one of the reasons bark and moss are very good choices for orchids. So I'm going to put in about an inch layer, and often I like to lay a little piece of crock to cover these side drainage holes, although you don't really strictly need to. But if you use a fine textured mix, this keeps the mix from falling out of the sides through these drainage holes. So there we go. And the next step, just move this off to the side here. There we go. Is I'm going to take more. Now this is fresh bark mix. This is a brand that we carry here at Young's. This is called Better Grow, and this is probably the best quality mix that I see in terms of bark. So I've soaked this for about 20 minutes to make sure that it absorbs some water. When you're repotting orchids, if you don't use a moist mix, it will steal water from the plant, which you do not want. So I'm going to take a handful of it and pop it in the bottom. That should be plenty. Now I'm going to take my division. Now Cattleyas are the sort of orchids that make a new growth every cycle. So these will continue. This plant is going to grow across the pot until it reaches this edge. So to give it the most space possible for growth, I'm going to put the cut end where I divided it against the side of the pot. Then, it's just a simple matter, add in fresh bark, and with your fingers, try to work it down in between the roots. The idea is that you don't want any major gaps. Air spaces are fine because they need them and it's just what they're used to in nature. But you don't want any large voids in the mix. So we're going to fill in. And with bark, since it doesn't have tons of give to it, you really should firm it in as best you can. I'm doing this with my thumb. Another popular item is called a potting stick. Again, not necessary. I've seen people use the occasional chopstick to do the same thing. And I'm filling in as you go. Give it a good tap on the counter to settle in the mix, and then continue adding. The idea is that this is going to be firm. You don't want it to really jiggle. So you've got to firm it nicely in the pot and continue to work it down with your fingers. I'm leaving about ½ an inch of space between the rim of the pot and the top of the mix, so that with watering, the bark doesn't float out and float away, rather, but it's something that allows you to water and not make a mess. And here we go. Another thing that you can do, by the way, if you wish to hold up the new growth, which is not strictly necessary, you can add a stake and tie it with twine or a twistum, and that'll hold it in position, and it helps hold the plant in position while it's reestablishing and the roots are grabbing onto this mix in the sides of the pot. And there we go. All done. I'm going to put the tag back in, and quite often I like to note a date on it, just to keep track of when I repotted it last. So I'll just jot that on there. 15, and in it goes. Now the aftercare, for the next week to 10 days, do not give this a full watering. What you can do is actually take a mister, just a plant sprayer like this, and every bright morning when the sun is out, mist the plant, which you can do anytime you'd like, but now you're not going to give this a full watering, but rather just mist the plant and the top and sides of the container. And that'll provide a little bit of moisture, but the overall drying will help the roots heal and help stimulate new growth and the growth of new roots. And there we go, this one is done. And we're going to repot another orchid. Now this is a Phalaenopsis, or what they call a moth orchid, and these are probably the most familiar ones you see in this day and age. Very common, excellent house plants, and these are always the orchid I recommend as the orchid to start with if you're just getting into them. Now this one is desperately in need of repotting. You can see all the roots have grown out, and the plant, since this is what they call a monopodial sort of orchid, it grows right out of the pot. Now the roots aren't really in contact with anything, so the plant is actually going to start to decline if we don't move it back down. So let's get started. Now this time I'm going to repot in sphagnum moss. And as I say, most Phalaenopsis orchids you see in the trade are growing in this. It's gotten to be very popular in recent years because it's less expensive, and since Phalaenopsis are orchids that like to stay uniformly moist, this is really good because it holds a lot of moisture and yet still allows air in around the roots, which is very important. A lot of people forget Phalaenopsis, like many orchids that we like to grow, originally grew up in trees as what we call epiphytes. We saw that with a Cattleya, and now here's a Phalaenopsis. So we do the same thing. This is just going to come out of the pot, like so. We've got a lot of stuff in there. And again, we're going to tease out the old mix from the roots. And one thing you'll find with Phalaenopsis is the newest roots, and these are uppermost on the plant, are the ones that are active. The ones down below, after a period of time, will die. And again, you can easily pick out the dead roots because they're brown or they're flat. Live roots are plump and white or whitish green or even silvery in some cases. So here we're going to want to cut out the dead stuff and get rid of that pot. And here we go. One thing with these two, and this is actually a bit of a time saver, is since the plant grows up, the oldest portion of the plant is down at the bottom and usually after a period of years dies off. So a nice quick trick, see, I've taken my fingers and I'm pressing right at the very bottom of the crown. This is the very base of the stem, and you give it a little snap. Whoops, bit of a snap. And all this dead material comes right off. If you see what's left, there's a few more dead roots to take out, but basically everything from there up is living tissue. We don't need this dead stuff, and all it does is take up space in the pot. So with this, let's snip out a couple more. 1, 2, there we go, that about does it. Okay. Now one thing I should explain, this is sphagnum moss as you normally see it available for sale. This batch, which we're using for the demonstration, just happens to have been colored green. This is the natural color for sphagnum moss. It can be a little darker or a little bit lighter. Green, well, this had a little help. The idea was to make it more decorative. Not necessary, and this certainly doesn't hurt the plant. Okay, so he's ready to pot up. Although, oh wait, I do see a couple of things I want to cut off. This is just tidying up here. You see these wider stems. These are old flower spikes that have died. And these, they don't need to be there. So again, with my sterilized pruners, I'm going to cut them off. Now we are ready to go. This one, although it's not the absolute perfect time, this is making new spikes. Actually, the plant should be better off in the new mix, so I doubt there'd be any interruption in the growth and flowering of this one. Okay, just like before, we're going to put a little bit of drainage in the pot. Here I'm using just a standard clay pot. You can also use orchid pots, plastic pots, glazed pots. As long as they have drainage holes, at least one, this is fine to use. Okay, let's throw a little drainage. Again, we're using broken clay pot shards. This prevents the drainage hole from clogging and provides it a little airspace in the bottom. Water collects there and then drains out the bottom of the pot. And a couple more pieces. There we go. Okay. And the first step, I'm going to take this moss, and here I want to show a little bit of a trick to it. So we've had this soaking. You don't need to soak it really more than 15-20 minutes. And you're going to wring out, just like a sponge, excess water. Put a nice lump in the bottom, and I may need to add more because what I want to do is I'm going to center this plant in the pot, and the whole idea is that we're going to take it down. I think I actually have to take a little moss out because we want to center it in the pot, and the new top of the mix should come right up to the base of the plant. It should end right under the first leaf, which is this one here. So we're gonna fill in with moss, and it'll come right up to where the new spikes are emerging. When the next season begins for these, you'll notice the new roots will come from right there and extend right down into the mix. And that's the way it should be for them. Okay, as I go, I'm gonna wring this out. And although it's important to firm it in the container, you do not want to compress it too much. Just as I've been doing here, I'm wringing out the excess water, I'm placing this in, and I'm gently working it down in between the roots with my fingers. As I go, you can also give it a tap on the counter. That'll help settle it into the pot. And let's continue. So we're gonna fill in on all sides here. Squish it out. All right, we're almost full. And again, I'm just firming this down with my fingers as I go. The whole idea, notice the plant is not jiggling. So I put the moss in firmly enough, but not so firm that it's too tight in the pot. The whole idea is when you're finished, you should still have a little bit of give to it, and the plant should not jiggle. It should be firmly based in the pot. All right, there we go. We're finished. So again, the moss has ended up between 1 inch and ½ an inch to the rim of the pot. And now the aftercare is quite simple. You can give it a little misting. But again, for the next week to 10 days, no full watering. The idea is this wants to dry down, and it's going to help any wounds that we've caused to heal up, and will also stimulate the growth of new roots. Meanwhile, these spikes should continue on their own, and this will be in bloom probably within 1.5 months. All right, there we go, all set. Enjoy.